I will apologise up front. I'm moderating myself for this session, so I don't have to stick to time. For those that don't know me, my name's Peter Wyatt. I'm the CTO of the PDF Association. I'm also a co-author, co-project leader of the ISO 32000 spec with Duff Johnson. I'm actively involved with ISO on many communities, not just the TC171 communities that we have here, but in TC130, the graphic arts, TC42 photography, which is all about HDR, which I'll be talking about soon. I'm also the liaison representative on behalf of members to other technical communities such as the ICC, the Colour Consortium, ETSI for PADES, for those who know digital signatures, and various other organisations which the PDF Association engages with to ensure that you guys are kept up to date with what's going on. So before I begin, I'd like to promote two events that we have here. So first of all, the next session is a poster session. It's a different set of posters from yesterday. I think it was a great opportunity to network, so please attend that with a clear understanding. The different posters from yesterday. This is the solution posters. I'd also like to promote our interactive history poster over near the registration desk. This is a timeline of all the PDF specifications, and I ask that everyone put a post-it note on that poster about when you had your sort of aha moment or an experience with PDF, because PDF is not just about the specs, and it's me saying this, it's about the community. It wouldn't be a success if many people at various points didn't found companies, come to the community. So please, if you haven't already, add a post-it note on it. And if we're lucky, we might get that into the second half of the movie. Okay, so moving on, let me just, sorry. Okay, so back on track. So today I've titled my talk Breaking Good. And by this, I mean breaking PDF. And by the way, this is not me in the photo. I have glasses and I have a beard. And I may occasionally look stern, especially when I see certain errata that are posted, but I think you get the idea. Okay, so what do I mean by sort of good versus bad? There's various ways we can break PDF. We can break it in ways that are backwards compatible. Maybe break it in ways that are, well, maybe this isn't really broken, but add new features. To me, this is not really breaking PDF. What I'm talking about are incompatible changes that cause the industry and customers and end users to go, wow, this file no longer works in my software. And that is because we've added a significant new feature. Now, obviously, we don't break PDF just because we want to. We only break it, we definitely only want to break it, if there's a highly desirable outcome for end users. Now, this also means that it may not be a highly desirable outcome for the developers in the room. We do need to consider end users. We do not want to break the brand of PDF. I'll go through the history of PDF soon and explain how the market dynamics are very different to the last time that PDF was significantly broken, back when it was controlled by a certain large vendor. So part of my message here is about clearly communicating to the market, which is both developers and stakeholders in the room, but also to the bigger market, that change is coming to PDF. We're not a static and staid and stagnant technology, that we are moving forward. We don't want an unprepared marketplace. We want the benefits to be clearly understood so that when customers see PDFs no longer working, they understand what that means and they know they can reach out to their vendor and the vendor will hopefully have a solution for them. And that is why we're giving everybody the heads up. We certainly don't want market confusion. We want also robust implementations. It's been decades since PDF was actually broken in non-backwards compatible ways. And I know from testing that that code that was written 2 decades ago maybe hasn't survived the intervening years, so that sometimes when you do open these files, in today's viewers, you get a less than ideal experience, and I'll go through that later. And of course, if things are crashing, there's the potential for exploits. Now, we all know, historically speaking, PDF has occasionally had a bad rap, and we certainly don't want to build on that, or at least ignite that flame again. The other thing we need to think about is support. So I will be the first one to acknowledge that PDF2 support has actually been a little bit slow in adoption, and I'll talk to this later. And there is a reason for that, and so forth and so on, which I'll go into. But I really want to make sure that everyone here in the room understands that together we need to move forward, because otherwise we can never move PDF seriously forward. So at the end of the day, what I'm really talking about is keeping the value proposition of PDF valuable to both us as businesses and also end users who need PDF to do their job. So at the end of the day, you need to choose whether you're going to use Thor's hammer or a bloody sledgehammer. And that's really what today's talk's about. We have options. You have options. But at the end of the day, this is not if we're going to break PDF. This is a when we're going to break PDF. Sorry, I just need to check my notes. Okay. So I've spoken to a little bit about this already. So let's talk about what we mean by the breaking good, breaking bad. It's about maintaining trust in PDF. We do believe that end users trust PDF documents more than they trust other file formats that are out there. We are ubiquitous. Now that's an outcome of 30 years. But people do trust PDF documents to provide that reliable experience. It's consistent across implementations in a reliable way. And okay, it might differ on certain platforms. The mobile experience may differ, but we are working on that. But we also want to maintain trust in our applications. The market dynamics are very different. We know for a fact now that a lot of end users actually, unfortunately, don't use proper software. They just rely on their web browser. So there's a whole new market dynamic about how do we get these people who aren't necessarily in this room this week on board with these breaking changes. And I will propose some things that you, this audience, can help with about that in the future. I mentioned a number of times marketplace dynamics. The last time we broke PDF, it was controlled by Adobe. They had their implementation ready to go at the same time we broke PDF. Now PDF is an international standard, or if you like, an industry standard in the PDF Association that we later adopt to ISO, and that's an interesting viewpoint which I'll discuss later. So I think there's a lot to do about preparing and communicating to the market, both physically in terms of making articles, but also communicating with the partners that you might work with. So the likes of big organisations that might write a lot of PDF files. We can break PDF, but if they never use the feature, then we really don't move the world forward for us. And if they don't adopt those features and they don't drive those features, then maybe people will walk away from PDF because they're missing some core benefits. And I will go through some of these technical details later on about exactly what I mean by that. So I do think there's a lot of opportunities here for PDF and for PDF companies. And to me, this makes good business sense. We're all here to grow our businesses, to grow PDF, and to make sure that we're moving forward and staying relevant as new content comes into play. So let's talk a little bit about the user experience. So this is from an article I wrote recently. So these are some of the messages that actually happened today. These are real messages from real products, but I've just obviously anonymised the names. And we definitely want to be, I think, on this your left-hand side of the presentation, about the experience that our end users can face. If, for example, files don't open, we don't want the message, it's a corrupted PDF, invalid PDF, scare tactics. We want to say maybe unsupported PDF, please ask for an upgrade or something. That's a business turning a negative into a business opportunity. Now, at the same time, that's assuming you even pass the crash test. And unfortunately today, as I say, it's been a long time since we broke PDF, and a lot of software hasn't maybe just kept up to date with realizing, things can go very bad very quickly. We don't want to get into the case of where people are saying, end users are saying, PDFs don't work anymore. That is bad for us. Yes, we already know situations where we have, it works in product X and not in product Y. But here we're talking fundamental breakages of PDF. We also want to think about the user experience in terms of the page. If, for example, we were to introduce a new image format, and I will talk specifically to this point in a few minutes, the blank page experience is a very different outcome to a proxy image. Now, this can actually be exploited, and there are actually exploits out there where people do this. And for example, two different people see, like maybe in an approval workflow, digital signature workflow, using different viewers, you can actually trick users into approving documents because the person, the manager is using software here, and they don't see something here. They approve the document, they digitally sign it, and then when it's actually printed, there's like, oh, and by the way, there's another $1 million you need to send to me as well. This is actually a real thing. I worked on this in SafeDocs. But we don't want this. We need to, as an industry, step forward together. So you can see here in this message up here, we're talking about versions. Now, I don't want to get into the version discussion. We haven't, in terms of discussing these new features in PDF, which I'll come to in a minute, discussed exactly what version PDF will be. You all should know now we have PDF 2.0. But what you may not realise is that actually is not quite correct. Since PDF 2.0 has been published, we have published a number of technical specifications which extend PDF. We have digital signatures, we have new elliptic curves, we have new hash algorithms, we have new 3D formats. We're working on adding C2PA content credentials into PDF. All these are extensions to PDF. So the version number alone is today insufficient. And in my previous talks, in previous meetings, I have spoken about that and I have written a few articles. We know for a fact that over 30% of PDFs in the wild have incorrect versions on them. Now that is unfortunate. Version numbers, if you like, I think are an easy handle. Users simply understand version numbers. But when they actually don't correlate to anything, we should really be thinking in terms of features. Does it matter that my PDF is labelled version 1.3 and has some 1.6 feature? I think today we'll say it's all just going to work. To be honest, I don't think any implementation in the room probably does a version check unless you're doing something technical like PDFA. So I should have said up front, this talk is really about general PDF, as in the consumer PDF. So how we communicate feature support, how users know the feature support is there, how consumers know to contact you to say, hey, do you have an upgrade or a extra cost option to support some fancy new encryption algorithm? These are problems that we're facing today. Now, those kinds of changes aren't necessarily breaking PDF. A lot of these are opt-in. So if you don't want to use the latest and greatest elliptical curve stuff, that's fine. You don't have to. There's existing options. But if we want to move forward, we almost all need to agree at least that that kind of level support is rolling out quickly. And we are seeing this, especially through the EAA and tagging that we've heard a lot about this week. So let's have a look at history of PDF, which, as I say, we had a history poster out the front, so if you want more details on exactly when and each feature came in. So really, let's talk about the big one. When PDF 1.4 was introduced in late 2001, Adobe added transparency and blending. If you didn't have PDF 1.4 technology, your PDF file looked different. Okay. Now, of course, back in the day, the dominant vendor provided, at the same time that spec came out, they provided Acrobat 5. And that was great for most users. But I was working in an industry where we were copying, backing up behind Adobe, and this was a major change. And it's a major technical change because prior to that point, all these versions here for effectively a decade, you could use underlying PostScript technology. It was the same imaging model. Many vendors, especially in the print space, were able to take PDF, convert it to PostScript, and then run it, and you really didn't see the PostScript stuff that was happening under the hood. But with transparency, you couldn't do that. PostScript doesn't have transparency. And yes, a lot of technology came around that we call what we might refer to as transparency flattening. We took overlapping objects with transparent areas, and instead we made 3 objects, and we tried to get all the borders to a button, and everything looks okay. But anyone who was around at the time would know that that was an imperfect solution. And as the world moved on, people moved and realized you did actually need to support transparency. But because there was a market dominated by a single player, everybody followed suit because we were led. We weren't doing the leading. In PDF 1.5 was the next big breaking change, object streams and cross-reference streams. If you had this in a file, especially cross-reference streams, you couldn't open the file if you didn't have technology that knew about it. Now, yes, there was this concept of hybrid streams, which is a very funny way of providing some form of backwards compatibility. But even still, that wasn't that widely used. Now, the other point at this is we added JPEG 2000. Now, this at the time was, this is 2003. It wasn't long after JPEG 2000 was released. And I worked on the JPEG 2000 standard, and at the time, everyone thought it was going to be the latest best thing. It was going to displace JPEG because it was just so much better. Unfortunately, it was so much better and so much more complicated. So we know with hindsight that that didn't happen, but at the time, we didn't know that. But the thing was, there's still lots of JPEG 2000 images. It's heavily used in the cultural heritage preservation kind of areas because the quality of images is high, compression is super good. You can put very large images in. There's lots of benefits, but it's not really general consumer-grade PDF. Later in 1.6, they added Adobe added open-type fonts. So it's a new font format. So what does that mean in terms of fallback behavior? Well, you can't read the font file, but thankfully we have font descriptors. So at least you could do a font substitution. In many cases, that's probably adequate for the general consumer. And if you had decent font substitution technology and a wide set of fonts, then the experience was probably acceptable. But still, it's technically broken in a way that you're not necessarily exactly seeing what you should be seeing. But since this point, so since, roughly 2005, 2006, it's been what I'm going to say relatively calm. And I don't want to mean relatively calm before a storm. We want to avoid that storm. We've had backward compatible new features. We've added annotation types and various things. But PDF has always said what to do with many of these features if you didn't support it. You maybe tell the user, maybe it's a user interface sort of Chrome, fancier bookmarks or layers or new ways of doing optional content based on your region or your language. In some cases, it's relying on backward compatible features. So if you think about PDF portable collections, portfolios, if you want to use a brand name. So these build on existing features in PDF. If you don't support collections, and today many viewers don't support collections, they use the embedded files list. Most products today will give you a list of files, attached files, embedded files, and you can navigate to it. Users have an experience. It's not the ideal experience. And that's maybe okay, right? That's in a way, it's backwards compatible. And users don't necessarily complain about that because they don't know what they're missing. But when we break PDF and you start getting, cross-reference streams, open that in a product that's built for PDF 1.3, that's not a good place to be. So I kind of think of these as opt-in features. We added stuff to PDF. Some products today still don't use many of these features, and it would be really good if they did. But this is not breaking PDF. This is extending PDF in my terminology, if you will. So let's now talk about the first thing we are going to break. This is not an if, it's a when. So Brotli. So what is Brotli? Sorry, let me get the notes. So Brotli is a general purpose compression engine, widely used on the web with things like web fonts. Sorry, let me just get my notes. So we know from our San Francisco meetings, hopefully many of you attended those, our symposium on the PDF imaging model, that file size is still critical today. Even though we have gigabytes on our phones and terabytes, petabytes in the cloud, file size is still critically important. And that's a good thing for us because it means there's lots of PDF files. That's why people want smaller PDF files, is because instead of being hundreds of them, there are now millions and billions of them. So size is important. So what do we need to do to reduce size? Well, we need to use better compression technology. Flake compression has been in since PDF 1.2, I think it is, off the top of my head. Now that's pretty old. That's, late 1990s, early 2000s. And Brotli is a great format. It is very widely supported in the web world and has been for a long time. You can see the date of its specification is July 2016. But in actual fact, it's been around since about 2013, 2012. So even though it's the latest and greatest, it's still a mature technology. So the other part I didn't really talk about is, or I mentioned, was the breaking part. We don't want to be breaking PDF with technology that maybe is not going to become a winner or that's going to give us some problems or maybe is, maybe the world will throw it out and use something else. With something like Brotli, I think we have a good track record in the web community that it is a very good technology. In case you're wondering, let me get this straight. In July 2022, it was reported that 96% of worldwide users using a browser supported Brotli. So that is how dominant it is. Now that was 3 years ago. I would say almost today it's probably 100%. So why might we use this? We might use it, for example, to reduce the size of our cross-reference streams in larger PDF files. Straight away we get a shrinkage. We might use it in object streams. We might use it to replace flake compression of bitmap images, just not an image format, but just pixels. And again, shrink, shrink, shrink. We've had some members do some work and show that you can get over 60% compression in a PDF by switching to this technology. Now that is, of course, depending to make sure that you put the right thing in the right object stream and cross-reference streams, because of course you can always make a more inefficient PDF. But I think a lot of you know that there are save as compressed PDF options in many PDF technologies. There is also an OSS reference implementation, widely used. It is actually the foundation of the spec. and they're kept up to date by Google, a big company. Having said that, there's also many implementations that exist today that are in other programming languages. If C++, which is what the reference implementation is not your gig, then there's plenty of other versions, including in things like JavaScript and sort of web languages. Now, the great thing about Brotli is you can also balance its outcome with its performance. So sometimes we have some great compression technologies, but maybe the creation time then just blows out. So one of the nice things about Brotli, much like JPEG, although nowadays you don't see this so much because JPEG is so quick, but you can effectively pick the equivalent of a JPEG Q factor, the quality factor. If you want to take a lot of time, you can get a really small size. And if you want to be quick, you get a slightly bigger file. It's trade-offs. And you're able, with Brotli, to control that for your customers. Okay, I should also add, so Brotli also has its own logo. So again, I know that seems small, but it does tell you that there's a whole community behind Brotli. So we actually have published various articles on the web already, on the PDF Association website, and provided sample files that use a new Brotli decode algorithm. The article goes on to mention that GhostScript today and MooPDF today both read and write these files. Now, we haven't formally specified it, and the reason for that is that we want everyone to come on board with us before we tell the world, hey, Brotli is an official thing. And this is really what I'm here to talk to you about today. The need to, for example, start implementing this. Also, take these files today and run it through an implementation that doesn't have Brotli. Are you giving that nice user message, hey, unsupported feature, or are you going corrupted PDF? We don't want that corrupted PDF message. That's a bad vibe for the community, it's a bad vibe for your own software, and it's bad for the PDF brand. Okay, so let's think a little bit about if I was to use Brotli, what are the consequences? So it really depends on what you compress. If you compress cross-reference stream, then you have the unfortunate situation that you can't access cross-reference data and you're probably dead in the water. And yes, you can possibly rebuild the cross-reference table if the objects aren't in some other Brotli compressed object stream. But again, if you're really going for size, you're not going to be compressing a cross-reference stream and then not compressing something else. If you were to put the Brotli compression on the object stream, so this is the object definitions that themselves are not streams, so dictionaries, arrays, all this kind of thing. That means you can't access some PDF objects. Now the trick here, when I say some, is that depending on how you implement things, you can maybe give a backward compatible experience. And this goes back to my comment before about hybrid reference PDFs. So what is a hybrid reference PDF? It was Adobe's attempt to support cross-reference streams for the first time and provide some backwards compatibility. So let me explain how it works. In their model, you can provide, for example, a page display in the conventional PDF backwards compatible since PDF 1.0. That's great. But you could then provide something like all the logical structure in a compressed object stream. Anyone who knows anything about logical structure knows it's hundreds of little dictionaries and they're all linked together and so forth and so on. But there's really no stream data. It's just lots and lots and lots of objects. And it can, I wouldn't say bloat the file, but there can be a lot of data if you have a long document. So by putting that in the compressed side of things, at least the user could see their PDF. Maybe they miss out on the accessibility side, but remember this is 15 years ago and accessibility demands were different then. So it was a nice way where you could sort of say, I can give you a backward compatible experience, and maybe you'll lose a few features, accessibility or logical structure. Over time now, we don't see this so much. I footnote, Microsoft Office still creates hybrid reference files. Because we want smaller files. So you put all the data in the object stream, everything that's not a stream, and then of course you can't even get to page content, you can't get to your page tree, lots of problems. So again, there may be some trade-offs here, so I am sort of summarizing here in terms of that you cannot open a PDF. So what happens if you, for example, did a Brotli compression on a page content stream? What do we know about the page that's not the content stream? Well, we know the media box size. So at least you can draw a white rectangle page on a screen. Hey, that's a start. The user's not missing page content. But again, you would expect to put some kind of what I call a proxy, some kind of indication that I know the page is this big and it's in this position in the document, it's the 23rd page. You could help your user understand that there is an experience they can get, but it's not the correct experience. So the media box is obviously an entry in a dictionary. It's maybe in a normal object, or maybe it's in an object stream. So again, you need to think through, maybe I want to not put the page tree, for example, in the Brotli compression. So there are choices you make for your customers that the PDF spec won't tell you. And maybe this is something, as an association, we can help you understand these options and work through. That's maybe a future discussion. So what happens if you can't show part of a page? By this I mean an X object, whether it be a form or an image, a type 3 glyph description, a pattern cell, an annotation, basically any content stream with graphic commands. So that means you can't show a portion of the page. All portions of the page have some defined bounding box or rectangle. We know that. That's not a problem, because it means, again, you can put a proxy, you can indicate to the user, hey user, there was something missing here. It's not that particularly hard to do. And of course, then we get to the sort of, things are broken, but it's more an unreliable display. It's not exactly as the author intended. Maybe it's okay, maybe it's not. And again, that will depend on your ability to do things like font substitution, assuming that you're a renderer, maybe information extraction. Again, it all depends on what you're doing. So as I say, font resources might invoke some kind of font substitution. If it's a highly compressed ICC profile, and these can be big if you're using print space and calibrations and so forth, you'll get some fallback color processing. Would the average user mind? Probably not. Would a PDFX user or a PDFA user mind? Absolutely. But I'm not really addressing those subsets. I'm really talking about the average consumer using PDF in their everyday lives and in the business context. What happens if you can't get to metadata? How many people look at metadata? Maybe it's a big issue, maybe it's not. Maybe that depends on your specific business workflow. Maybe there's custom metadata in here that drives a workflow. Maybe it's just the usual title, author, subject, that kind of thing. This is all things for you to think through. We can't necessarily prescribe in the PDF spec exactly what to expect. So I'm now going to talk about HDR, and I think this is one of the compelling cases for breaking PDF. In actual fact, we know that because we've heard it from stakeholders, and we've been working on this, I guess, on and off for probably 5, 6, 7 years. What's critical in understanding is HDR is not a single thing. We all know about sRGB, or what we might refer to as SDR, Standard Dynamic Range, where everybody's device looks exactly the same. HDR is really about your equipment. So here, for example, this says typical HDR display. So this is the normal display we get with sort of, you can think of this as sRGB. And with HDR technology, you have much more detail in the dark areas, sort of down here. I don't think this is projecting very well. But the top end of the display is where the fancy technology is. This is where the ultra bright areas, such as these kind of things, can change. And you already experience this today, that HDR is not a single thing. When you have a modern mobile phone, you take your photo, pointing it at the sun, and then you view it on your HDR-enabled mobile, which is pretty much everything nowadays. The display you see can change. Walk out into the daylight. The ambient light sensor on your phone will detect that you're outside, and it will actually change the color so that the brights are visible, the dark shadows, so it shifts the colors depending on the ambient light sensor. Technology today on phones actually looks at the size of the blowout area, the very white areas, because that generates heat. And we certainly don't want our LCD screens either burning a hole in our hand or chewing through our batteries. So again, depending on your battery level, depending on your exact screen technology, depending on how much, how big that area is, this will all change your display. And you can do this today. Go outside, take a photo, and then walk through different environments, and you'll watch your screen change. What you actually notice is nothing changing, because they're changing it to support your human perception of the color. But if you look at it kind of on the side, you can kind of see that it is actually, the pixels are changing. Does that kind of make sense? So the other key point to note is that currently HDR technology is not up to speed with what can be physically captured by the phones. And this is what's really driving the HDR revolution. Modern phones capture more colors and capabilities than current display technology can display. So if you were to put a JPEG XL image or an HDR image onto a web browser, what you see is not necessarily what the data is. It will depend on Do you have the expensive screen? You know, my personal laptop is HDR now. Do you have the expensive $20,000 or more, you know, Apple latest and greatest professional graphic arts monitor? In which case you'll see something completely different. So HDR is here today. Every photo taken in the last probably close on 10 years is HDR. Even when you look at JPEGs today, if you bury into it, if you drill into it, you can sometimes see those HDR tags. Yes, sometimes that gets stripped out through the conversion process, but a lot of time if you were to take an HDR photo, right-click on it, convert to PDF, which many of your companies will offer this technology, it doesn't transcode the pixels. It just takes that JPEG file and puts it in the PDF. And because HDR is so popular, many of the popular software libraries already support HDR. You don't actually have to do anything. It's already just working. Which also means, from an industry point of view, those of you using those libraries that have HDR enabled already have HDR in PDF, you just don't know it. And this is a problem for us as an industry, because it means PDF is no longer a consistent display. Some people will show the HDR image, some people won't. Some operating systems have auto HDR capabilities where they'll take an SDR image and, you know, try and amp it up to maximize your expensive bit of hardware. This is not necessarily a great discussion to have for PDF. We're about reliable display. So working on supporting HDR is a really important thing that we are working on. It does break PDF's imaging model, so you need to be forewarned and forearmed about it. As I said, HDR content is everywhere today. So recently the association published a new application note, an FAQ-style application note, specifically designed for stakeholders. And that's because people were asking us, stakeholders were asking us, so I put my JPEG that I know is HDR because I can view it in my browser or on my desktop, and I put it in a PDF file, you know, what happens? And so there's actually very clear answers in the subset specifications. The answer is it cannot be HDR. Those specs are crystal clear that you need in conforming software to render it according to the rules of PDF. If you go to the base specifications for PDF, PDF 2.0, things are all kind of optional everywhere. I don't want to quite say that, but there's leeway. And you could certainly do something that your software is doing and maybe it makes a unique selling point for you. That's fine. But as an industry, we can't have everyone doing something different because trying to get the industry back together again will be very, very difficult, and there'll be, how do I say this, frictions in terms of, well, your software's broken, but mine continues to work because of the way we define things. We just don't want this friction. We want to move together. We want to move forward together. So I do recommend this publication, especially if you're sort of new to the HDR concept. But remember, this is only in the detailed subsets. It's not about general PDF. Okay, so let's talk about what if. What if we were, well, actually not what if, when. When are we going to break the PDF imaging model? So what does it mean? It means that we want HDR content and our today's SDR content, standard dynamic range content, to work seamlessly together. You can overlap images, you can blend them together, you can put text on things in such a way that it matches some other color somewhere on your page, that brand colors that maybe are making use of high dynamic range, and they do exist, that all things look good. We don't have that definition yet. We want predictable display of content. Now notice I don't say a predictable display of content. As I said, it will depend on what hardware you have. If you have very capable hardware, I would hope that you can get a really fantastic looking PDF on your screen with, you know, fantastic looking HDR content. And you might think, why would I want that? Well, a photo book is a classic example. So it really depends on how we pitch this to end users. And as I said, the issue today is that some viewers are showing HDR content when I would love it if they didn't, but I guess that's because people build on the stack of cards of open source software. So there are many groups working on this. The W3C, for those that attended discussions yesterday from Mike, may have heard a little bit about the work they've been doing. The ICC are actively looking at how HDR data is encoded in ICC profiles. This has to do with about how conversion happens, the fact that a white point is no longer a white point. There's something whiter than white is what you can think about in terms of HDR, and blacker than black. That's kind of how you can think about HDR. But no one's really solved the mixed media problem. There's a lot of groups that have said, well, this is an image format that does HDR. Now, those are coming often out of, so PNG version 3 supports HDR, JPEG XL, which I'll talk to in a minute, supports HDR. Those groups that define those don't think about mixed content, and PDF in my mind is very much about mixed content. Images are part of page content, text, graphics, images. So there's a lot of sort of watch this space. Literally a few weeks ago, one of the core specifications for HDR finally finished and got published. Like, footnote, we'll take a little bit of a sidetrack now. Like you would understand with PDF, ISO standards are not free, and there's now a big movement from the industries, big companies wanting to make that new standard more available to open source communities and the technical industry in general. So part of HDR is images, and this is, if you like, the low-hanging fruit of HDR. We need to adopt a new image that can support HDR content. We've done some investigation. This is really the work that's been done recently, and we have picked JPEG XL as our preferred solution. It's a new HDR lossless image compression format, so effectively it'll be a PDF filter. Don't ask me what the filter name is, because we haven't decided yet. It's not only HDR though, it provides a lot of other benefits. We have wide gamut images, we have ultra high resolution images, over 1 billion pixels per size. Now you might say, yeah, that's a pretty big photo book, but there are certainly use cases, I think, for that. Cultural heritage, as I say. For example, I know the US Metropolitan Museum images all their artworks in these sort of super high resolution formats. We can also have up to 4,099 channels, so effectively a device and image space. What else have we got? We've got up to 32 bits per channel. Lots of other features. So all these things are sort of beyond HDR. You need to think that this is, although this is for HDR, it comes with a lot of other benefits that users could benefit from. And maybe not every user, but we really don't know, whether some of these, I can't really imagine an image with 4,099 colours, but I can imagine an image with maybe 10 or 16 to match inks on a printer, or maybe some more advanced, I'm thinking things like spectral imaging, if anyone knows what spectral imaging is. So being able to sort of adjust light. There's lots of information out there. I recommend this link, gives you a nice, pretty understanding of what's going on. It's not very technical. It shows you the benefits, and if you happen to have an HDR monitor, you'll have a much better experience than if you don't. Whereas this is all the technical stuff. The actual JPEG XL standard itself is this 18181. It's 4 parts, published in 2024. So that tells you also that it's relatively new. Now, although that's an ISO standard, it was actually developed in the JPEG community well before that. So in terms of PDF, I can't tell you what the answer is today, but I can tell you we will adopt JPEG XL as a new image format and have to consider all the implications to rendering. So let's go back now to thinking about content streams, and I've also mentioned about this. What else could we do with content streams? If we're going to make them inaccessible through Brotli compression, maybe we can do a few other things. Users, I guess, don't really notice content streams, but they contribute to smaller PDF files. If you think of something like a CAD drawing, an AutoCAD drawing, content streams in those documents can be very, very big. We also want PDFs to be easier to edit. And anyone who's gone to an accessibility tagging kind of discussion or post of this week, probably, if you're not into that space, you probably go, wow, they do a lot of hard lifting to map semantics onto content and mark this as a span and this as a paragraph. That's all heavy lifting. That's very hard to do. So it's something we could do to make that more reliable, easier to perform, quicker, etc. And also, is there something we could do to reduce errors in PDF? Anyone that does rendering probably knows, just like you can have errors in dictionaries and arrays and other things in PDF, you can have errors in content streams. So this is all the motivations, if you will, to think about what else we could do with content streams. Now again, these are just the topics we've discussed. Absolutely nothing has been decided. But we've thought about, for example, maybe we can convert from our ASCII format of content streams to a binary format. So instead of having to have 15 bytes of ASCII digits to have a floating point number, 32 bits, binary number, bang in the file, straight away much smaller. We could also switch to a structured format, and that's especially for the editing of PDF and the less errors. If we use a structured format, so this this is JSON's binary serialization format, which we actually discussed. I mean, that's a really great idea. So this goes hand in hand. If we're breaking PDF, do we do 10 breaks as one big package, or do we do a number of little breaks? We don't really know. I will say, however, Brotli is coming whether you like it or not. So please like it. But when we get to sort of these kind of discussions, this hasn't resolved. Obviously, the more we break PDF, the more sort of engineering efforts involved for you to bring your software up to date. So, you know, maybe it's not worth doing the binary operators and operands because the savings we get from Brotli are pretty good anyway. So we haven't really had these discussions, but it's all part of the thinking that we're going through. Streamable PDF. So I'm now really getting into some other areas of PDF. If you like, the messages we heard from the 2022 symposium on breaking PDF. So streamable PDF. Why would people still want streamable PDF? Well, let's face it, most PDFs are consumed on your mobile phone or a mobile device, and they're being downloaded somewhere. And we've all probably had the experience where it's a linearized PDF, meaning that today, you know, the first page can display very quickly. If you're lucky, you'll get the bookmarks. You then click on a bookmark, or maybe it's just a link on the first page, and then you want to jump to page 99. Well, you can't jump to page 99 currently until the rest of the PDF file downloads. But what if there was a way where we could be more pull down the PDF in sort of chunks, chunkable PDF, I really don't like that word, but hopefully that makes more sense, where you can sort of, on demand, as the user requires, pull down the bits of the PDF, and, you know, eventually over some, hopefully, milliseconds, you'll get the whole PDF. So these are the ideas we're working through. Another one is a simultaneous creation consumption model, very important in the high volume variable data printing industry. So think your utility bills or your MasterCard statements or something like that. These files are very, very large, many, many tens of gigabytes and millions of pages. So if you have to wait till the end of the file before you can process it, then that's really not going to work very well. You need to have lots of storage. Well, PDFVT already defines a method of doing this called PDVTS, the streamable. But that's not exactly, there's still some restrictions around that, there's some issues around that. So again, we've been discussing these ideas. So this is really about a new form of linearization, if you want to think about it that way, and maybe some rules about object ordering in the PDF file so you can start displaying stuff. Now, what's very interesting when you think about a PDF file is the way that logical structure is very different from graphics. So if you're a blind user, then are you going to be able to get part of the logical structure tree enough to navigate to page 99? And again, so you can imagine this could potentially have ripple effects to the whole object model in PDF. So we are very conscious of this, but we don't have a solution. I'm just raising this as, what if we broke PDF in this kind of way? You know, how would you react? But it's got to be valuable to the customers at the end of the day. So I want to sort of summarize now. So let's talk about breaking changes in PDF. It's, as I've said a number of times, it's not an if, it's a when. Content is changing. Realistically, content already changed 5 years ago and we've been a bit slow to catch up, especially in the HDR space. Are big breaks better than constant breaks? Back in the 2000s, as you saw from my history poster, PDF 1.4, PDF 1.5, PDF 1.6, bang, 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 almost a year apart each one. We haven't broken PDF. PDF 2 didn't really break PDF. PDF 2 was about getting all the mistakes that other people besides Adobe understood in the spec and trying to get those resolved. And we added a few new features, but nothing really broke. It's also been a very long time, and I know from experimenting with software out there, we need to do a better job in messaging to the user. Then it's not corrupted, well, it's not crashing, first of all, no one likes crashing. It's not crashing, and it's not corrupted PDF or invalid PDF. It's, you know, unsupported PDF, and there's a big difference, I think, in supporting user mindsets with that. We need to be considerate to our users and consider them in our design decisions. For example, adding visible placeholders for missing content. Some viewers do this today, that's great, and it's probably old code written back in the PDF 1.4, 1.5, 1.6 days. A lot don't do this. We need to be proactive. So what can you do today? Well, I think you can go back and you can review your error handling messages. Not the actual error handling itself, but the text that's on the screen that you present to the user. I'd also like you to consider how you communicate features to PDF. We know PDF 2 wasn't fast adopted, but let's pretend that you do support PDF 2, and you actually say on your marketing brochure, support PDF 2.0. Does that mean you support the 6 or so extensions or not? And these extensions are continuously coming. And you can think of Brotli as an extension, if you will. One feature. You don't have to use it, but if you do use it, you can potentially make it problematic. So now a little bit of call to action here. These discussions happen across 2 working groups in the PDF Association. The PDF TWG, for which I chair, which discusses these non-rendering related issues. This is where Brotli came from, and some of the discussions about streaming PDF, alternative content stream formats, all these kind of discussions. The imaging model PDF is very much clearly focused on HDR. Hopefully you're understanding from today's talk, this is much more than just bunging in a new image format and we'll be done. We need to consider all the other consequences. And I also think there's a big opportunity. As I said at the beginning of the talk, the majority of PDF users today don't use software that you guys write. They use their browsers. That's just a fact of life. Now, there's lots of opportunity for us as a community to contribute back into that community and make them aware, hey, can you add Brotli support? Brotli support in some libraries is literally just a few lines of code. Brotli already exists in every browser today. So you could talk to open source communities. And I know this, I've been speaking to LibreOffice because they reached out. They were struggling to support PDF 2.0, not because they couldn't get access to the spec, because they didn't understand it. They're not PDF people. They're Office format people. And PDF is a huge, important part of them. And so that's, for example, why we wrote the FAQs, why we wrote the application note on how to do dual conforming A and UA documents. It's driven by the community saying, PDF is great, but I just don't get it. So I think there's an opportunity for you to reach out to both the open source communities, maybe sponsor a developer. We've got a couple of open source developers here today, or actually in the conference, so I'm sure they'd love a support. But also maybe if you know people in Microsoft or applications that your technology works with, talk to them about, well, can you maybe write this new kind of PDF stuff out? Because it's valuable. Smaller files are better. You'll show market leadership. I think there's benefits if we pitch it right and we work together. My talk, I'm now concluding. My talk has a lot of articles. When all the talks this week are being filmed, you've probably noticed that. It will be available online afterwards. These are the links. The most important ones I do want to talk to is you can actually get real Brotli files today, and you can test them with your software. And I've also made more targeted examples here where I've broken each of the kinds of streams which I went through in my consequences slide, and you can test to make sure that your experience is good. Okay, so I guess the call to action is, which hammer do you want to wield? Do we want to wield Thor's hammer, or do we want to be bloodied and bashed up? So thank you, everyone. I have to now moderate and answer questions. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Mark, sorry, I've just got to turn the microphone on. Do you mind me running the microphone around afterwards?
Yep. So, Peter, thank you for a really great talk. One question is where you feel we should stand on the backward compatibility, in that something written in 2005 using maybe iText 217 would now be broken by software, and that's acceptable because it's no longer working, or is the aim that these are all essentially changes that there will be an alternative? So, for example, if you don't support thumbnails, you ignore it. That's not a feature that would break a viewer that doesn't support it.
So my definition of breaking is not that latter example. That to me is an opt-in kind of feature. So for the old software, so this is why it's important, I think, that we need to spread the word, spread the gospel, if you will. We are going to break PDF. This is not like, oh, I'd rather if you didn't. There is no alternative. Now, in the old days, to be very frank, Adobe just did it and we all followed suit. But that's not the market dynamics we have today. So we have to get everybody on board, which is why we're communicating. The Brotli articles, I think, date back almost 18 months now. And so this is a forum, obviously, where I can sort of bang the drum, get on board. There are a number of commercial products out there that already support Brotli, and I don't want to name them because I might either get them wrong or miss somebody, and I don't want to do that. But there are commercial products out there today that have Brotli support there because I know it's coming. It'd be great if everyone else did that. So as a PDF Association member, this is sort of forewarned. Actually, one point I didn't also say is these extensions are likely to be done as an association document before we make it an ISO document. And the reason for that is so that we can get some take up of the feature, and so when it becomes a big official thing in ISO, the market's ready. Does that make sense? Does that answer your kind of question?
So there are features we should absolutely support, and we should have a mechanism for gracefully saying, sorry, but you need to have X in order to work.
Well, especially HDR. HDR is never going to be backwards compatible unless you wanted to probably have 2 PDFs in a file, right?
Yeah.
So, any other questions for me? I'm moderating as well as talking. Okay, I hope I didn't skip. Yep. Microphone.
This is something we discussed actually in another session online. Maybe PDF products should be start to tell users when the file is broken, really broken.
It's not broken.
No. Wait, when it's really broken.
Oh, okay.
That's the problem with we discussed about recovery algorithm for PDFs, which can cause also security concerns.
Yep.
And yes, if the file is really broken, where you have a cross-reference is broken, currently Adobe products, well, I don't know, I shouldn't mention any product, sorry, sorry for that. Well, all products should begin warn the user in a proper way, as you say, in a good way.
Yes. So my view on that would be, for example, we wouldn't want somebody to recover this file with a new feature in a way that then recovers something that is just the stuff that didn't have Brotli compression because it just didn't have Brotli compression. Because when you can only recover what you can read in a file. So for example, if you can't get any of the cross-reference data, then you can rebuild it. But if all the objects are in the Brotli compression, you can't even do that. So I think communicating with people, getting people to check their behaviors, this is all what, it's been 15 years or 20 years since we broke PDF. And now's the time to check it. Because we will be introducing Brotli. Because we've had a number of years where we've been too nervous, but we're just making ourselves irrelevant with things like HDR technology. And anyone who sat through Mike's talk yesterday, a very technical talk, probably understands that. So yeah, as I say, it's a hard conversation, but let's face it, if we were still owned by a large vendor, then we'd all just do it anyway, right? It's just now, it's a community, not a single vendor. So we do need to move the technology forward. Any other questions?
We're giving Peter too much of an easy ride on this, I think.
Yeah. Or I Baffadil with science, one of the two. Okay, thank you. I do want to say poster session is next door. Where are we? Next door that way. It's different posters from yesterday. And please contribute to the history poster out the front. Maybe when you're on there, you can look at the other details. My timeline was a summary. So thank you, everyone.